أهلا وسهلا بكم في هذا اللقاء الخاص الذي تجريه سكاي نيوز عربية مع آموس هوكشتاين، وهو المبعوث الرئاسي الخاص للرئيس الأميركي بايدن لشؤون الطاقة والبنى التحتية. أهلا وسهلا بك.
أهلا وسهلا. Thank you very much, Lubna, for having me. It's good to be back.
دعني أبدأ وإياك بموضوع المخزونات الاستراتيجية الأمريكية في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. تم السحب منها بالتأكيد، وكان الهدف بشكل رئيسي هو تخفيض الأسعار. أنا أعرف بأنه أنت مقتنع تماما بهذه الخطوة وبنتائجها اللي حدثت فيما بعد، لكن الآن الحديث والنقاش حول كيف للولايات المتحدة الأمريكية أن تعيد ملء هذه المخزونات، وخصوصا أنه موضوع الملء مهم جدا. هناك أرقام تستهدفها الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية حتى تقوم بهذا الملء من جديد عند $70 تقريبا. ما هي الأجندة الموضوعة؟
Lubna, President Biden took an extraordinary step in 2022 because we had remarkable, extraordinary, horrific event of an invasion of one country invaded another when Putin decided to start a war that was completely unprovoked and unnecessary in Ukraine. As you know, Russia is a major oil producer and a supplier of energy and gas, of oil and gas to Europe. So there was a natural reaction in the markets of rising prices out of fear of what was going to happen in the world. Now, this was also happening as we were coming out of COVID. So the world was reopening. So these two pressures raised prices to well above $120 a barrel. And President Biden, together with leaders from around the world, announced a 180 million barrel release from U.S. strategic reserves, along with another 60 million barrels from the rest of the world. And we recognize that that was an extraordinary, we've never done anything like that before. But it was necessary. And through that action, as well as several others, we were able to bring prices from $120 a barrel or so in June all the way down to 80 or even below 80 recently. And it was not easy. Your question is correct, though. We've taken this extraordinary step, and we said we would now refill if prices come down. And we still stand by that. If, as the president said, if prices come down to around $70 or so, we will be strategic in trying to replenish, and it will take some time. Now, we were supposed to release more oil out of the strategic reserve between this year all the way to 2027. We were mandated to do so by law. And that was a significant amount of oil. In the latest congressional action in the United States, they've canceled the mandated sales. So in a sense, we are already replenishing by canceling the future sales that we were going to do over the next several years. So that step we've already taken. And for the president, look, if most of the oil that we sold, it all averaged at significantly above $90 a barrel. So if we can sell oil at over $90 a barrel and buy it back at 70, it's a pretty good deal for the American people.
وهنا يمكن السؤال اللي بيطرح نفسه، ما هو النطاق السعري للنفط اللي تعتقد الإدارة الأمريكية بأنه مناسب حتى تضمن استمرار قدوم السبلايز أو الإمدادات للسوق والحفاظ أو دعم النمو الاقتصادي؟
Well, we don't say what the price that we're looking for. That's not what the government does. We have been clear about what we think is necessary, and that is to make sure that the price can be as low as possible to support both those who are producing it, while at the same time support economic growth. When prices were at 120, we clearly did whatever we had to do, and the president was adamant that the average American family, American drivers, could not be paying what at the time was $5 a gallon of gasoline in the United States. And we brought that price down because that was not going to support continued growth. But that's not just an American concern. Higher inflation rates, higher prices as a result of the war were something that was plaguing the rest of the world. So if we want to continue to make sure that the global economy continues to grow, we have to bring down price and reduce pressure on inflation. And one of the key places to do that is energy. We have to bring down the costs of gasoline and diesel and other products, because at the end of the day, that's not just about our cars. that is what affects our food prices. That's what affects so many other things that we do and that affect our costs for every family around the world. We don't farm in a way that is a farm to table. We are a farm to a truck, to the supermarket, to our table. So the price of diesel, the price of gasoline is a big part of our food prices as well. So it is necessary to make sure that prices are lower, even if it makes a little less profit for the producers. We're not asking them not to make a profit. We totally understand that. But they don't have to make extraordinary profits on the backs of the consumers around the world.
هذا ربما أيضا يقود إلى سؤال آخر حول بعض الاتهامات للولايات المتحدة الأمريكية عن طريقة التعامل مع أوروبا في ظل الأزمة الحالية. الاتهامات تقول بأنه الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية استغلت أو استخدمت هذه الأزمة، هذه الحرب، حتى تقوم ببيع الغاز المسال بأضعاف السعر لأوروبا، بحيث تجعل من أوروبا معتمدة عليها. كيف تجيب على ذلك؟
Now, those accusations are usually made by people who don't understand the market and how it works, and it couldn't be further from the truth. LNG that leaves the United States leaves on a market basis, and usually at a significantly lower price than what it is sold in Europe. So if there are companies that are buying it at the American price and then selling it at a higher price in Europe, that's happening outside the United States. The US government doesn't control the price of the LNG of gas in America, and it doesn't control the price of LNG when it leaves the United States. But I can assure you that all the LNG that leaves the United States is leaving it at a significantly lower price. And anyone in Europe can contract for American LNG. If it is at a contract terms, it will be at significantly below the prices that we had seen in Europe this past winter and last fall. So there's no reason to think that the United States is doing anything but supplying Europe with at cost, lower cost LNG than probably from any other source. As far as the dependency, look, we've never said that Europe or anyone should buy just US gas. On the contrary, I can assure you there's not enough gas out of the United States or not enough LNG out of the United States to supply the current market. What we want to see is a well-diversified LNG market, a diversified natural gas market that consumers can have a choice. They can buy from Qatar, they can buy from the United States, they can buy it from Norway, they can buy it from Australia. So there are plenty of opportunities. And before the war, we never said Europe should stop buying from Russia either. What we did say, though, and I can tell you that I did this when I was in the Obama administration, I warned against the over-reliance on Russian gas because it was absent competition. It was putting all your eggs in one basket. I think European consumers deserve to have lower prices and more options. And I think that we are currently in a war situation where we are not talking about dependency on anyone or any one source. We just want to make sure Europe has enough gas to last through the winter and to make sure that the economic warfare, the weaponization of energy, of Putin turning natural gas and diesel into weapons, that is something that we should be wary of. He is the one that making that threat. And we have to come together, all suppliers, to make sure Europe has enough to survive and enough to show Putin that he cannot use his resources as weapons.
اسمح لي أن أكون حشرية هنا، لأنه هناك حديث رسمي من الرئيس الفرنسي ومن جهة ألمانيا أيضا، يعني نحكي عن أكبر اقتصادين في منطقة اليورو، حول ضيق صدرهم بالأسعار التي تقوم الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية ببيع الغاز المسال لها. وأكثر من مرة حتى على لسان الرئيس الفرنسي الذي قال لا يعامل الأصدقاء كذلك. هل تلقيتم شيء مكتوب رسمي بهذه ربما المطالب، أو الموضوع لا يتعدى كلام رئاسي للجماهير وللشعب؟
Lubna, we have a very strong relationship with all our allies in Europe, and throughout this war, the one thing that has really surprised President Putin has been the strength of the alliance, the transatlantic alliance between the United States and Europe, and more broadly, the international alliance of countries standing up. And President Biden and the President of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, signed or announced an agreement on March 25th of last year to cooperate on LNG and on natural gas and on reducing demand and on renewable energy in order to be able to help Europe stand up. The United States continues to support Europe and will continue to support Europe in every way that we can. And I can assure you that while there is some disconcern or some concern in Europe by some leaders with how the companies are operating and why prices in Europe rose to the degree that they did, I think they know quite well, and we have an excellent dialogue with them on the fact that the United States has stepped up to do everything we can to support Europe. And if anything, the alliance in energy and across the economic spectrum has strengthened considerably. And President France was in the United States recently for a very warm visit. President communicates with his counterparts very often. We do as well. I think the big story out of this war is President Biden really bringing everyone together and keeping the alliance as strong as he has.
سأعود وإياك إلى موضوع الأسعار. ضمن جوابك عن موضوع المخزونات الاستراتيجية قلت بأنه هي كانت سبب رئيسي لخفض الأسعار. هناك سبب آخر يعني البعض يقول بأنه كان لها التأثير الأكبر، وهو ما يحدث في الصين. الصين أحد أكبر مشتري الطاقة في العالم، ثاني أكبر اقتصاد بالعالم، والعام الماضي اشترت أو طلب على الطاقة كان الأقل في 30 عام، يعني بحوالي 3 عقود. بالتالي هذا أثر نوعا ما على الأسعار. اليوم الصين تعود، هذا المشتري الكبير يعود إلى السوق. كيف ترى هذا الموضوع يغير الصورة في أسواق النفط والغاز برأيك؟
So you're 100% correct. Over the last year with China in their very restrictive COVID policy meant that their demand was lower. They've now removed the restrictions on COVID, and demand is picking up, as we would expect. It's going to be the Chinese New Year soon, which means an enormous amount of travel by car, by plane, and a lot of shopping. So we'll see an uptick, and we're already seeing prices go up a little bit from their lows. I think that the market, and for us as the United States government, we've already been thinking about it and preparing for it. We knew that the day would come. We didn't know exactly when, but we knew the day would come that China would return to a healthier demand for energy as they are now. And which is why we have called on producers, whether they were state-owned or producers in the United States or anywhere else, to continue to invest in production. We've seen companies, oil producers over the last year, when I say that prices went to $120 a barrel in June, that means extraordinary profits for producers, whether they're state-owned or private or publicly traded. What we wanted them to do, what President Biden has called on them to do, is to use those profits and to put them into invest those dollars in production, in increasing production, because we know that there are going to be changes in the market. The war is not over yet. And we need to make sure that as China comes back, that we have the sufficient supplies. I think we're in a better place. We'll have to monitor it very closely. But we continue to call on producers to invest their profits investing it in production increases.
دعني أنتقل الآن إلى موضوع آخر، موضوع روسيا. في أكثر من مناسبة قلت بأن السقف الذي تم وضعه على النفط الروسي أتى بثماره. اشرح لي كيف، وهل تعتبر بأنه هذه الحرب الاقتصادية على روسيا نجحت؟
There's no winning here, Lubna. We're in a tragic place where we have a war that never should have started and can end at any time. Putin can end this war. So I'm not going to say that we won the economic war. This is a war we don't want to be in. We don't want to be in a place of sanctions and intervening in the markets and so on. We just have no choice. We are trying to make sure that while Putin is waging a war in Ukraine, that we restrict his access to extraordinary profits at the same time. And to make sure that as we impose sanctions on him and on the Russian economy, that the pain that's felt is felt by Putin, not by Europe, not by the United States, not by our allies. And to do that, we put the price cap in place in order to make sure that we have, on the one hand, continued oil supplies, and on the other, to restrict his revenues. I don't say to anyone that it succeeded, because we're only a month into the price cap.
Yes.
So it's a bit too early to say anything. But so far, what I've said is so far so good. So far it's working. And this has been a complicated set of policies to impose and to implement by the G7, but it's working for now. And I hope it continues and we will work. And what do I mean by that? We have the oil supplies. We've avoided an oil shock in the market and for consumers. And we know that Russian oil right now is selling at a significant discount. And I've seen in some of the other networks that are, and financial consultancies, that his oil is selling as at significant discount, even just the last several weeks at below $40 a barrel. And that's what we were trying to achieve. And our message to Putin is very simple: end the war and we can end this whole process. So we're not trying to win an economic war here. What we want to end is the horrific war, actual war, that's happening in Ukraine.
هنا اسمح لي أيضا أن أطرح عليك تساؤل آخر. في هذه الحرب الاقتصادية وفي مجموعة العقوبات التي تم وضعها على روسيا، كان هناك استخدام للدولار، يعني كان هناك تجميد لأصول لروسيا موضوعة في الخارج. البعض يقول بأنها أفقدت الدولار نوعا ما الثقة به. هل يعني خصوصا أن الدولار هو عملة احتياط عالمية، هل تعتقد بأنه هذا الكلام صحيح أو يعني فعلا مبالغ فيه جدا؟
Well, I think we've seen no evidence of that, first of all, in the real world. Maybe on social media, people who like to type and send up some messages. But look, it's very easy. If you want to keep using the dollar, don't invade your neighbors. Okay. Don't commit atrocities. Don't murder women and children. Don't attack another country's critical infrastructure and deny them water and food, education. That seems like not a very hard recipe to follow to be able to be part of the global family of nations.
يعني لا أستطيع أن أراك ولا أسألك عن موضوع الصين. هناك بعض التوتر بالعلاقات الصينية الأميركية. إذا سألتك عن أين تقف هذه العلاقات اليوم وما هو حجم التعاون والتنسيق بين الدولتين، ما هو جوابك؟
Well, as you know, President Biden has had several calls, video calls, phone calls with President Xi Jinping. The two presidents met when we were in Indonesia and Bali at the G20 just a couple of months ago. So there is constant communication, and we clearly, as you know, it's not a surprise that we don't necessarily see the world in the same way. There is there's some global competition in certain areas. We have different values that we provide and that we continue to work towards, but we also believe in having stability and peace and security and ensuring economic growth around the world. So we're going to continue to do, and President Biden will continue to lead the United States in a way that is a policy around the world, not just at home, that reflects American values. And we think that when presented with the option between the sort of global free market values that respect human rights, that respect democracy, then respect labor laws and environmental laws, and have those kinds of values embedded in our international values, in business transactions, I think most people around the world would prefer to do business in a way that reflects those values.
أنهي معك بسؤال أخير. حول ما يتم نقاشه اليوم عن نظام عالمي جديد متعدد الأقطاب تختلف به الصورة عن ما كان عنه سابقا. ما هي نظرة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية للعالم خلال المرحلة القادمة؟
I'm not aware of the hype about a new world order. I think what President Biden and the United States have done over the last now 2 years since he's come into office is to offer a leadership that unites the world around values. And clearly no one planned on a war in the middle of Europe. We definitely didn't think that these kinds of wars would still exist in the 21st century. But I think at the end of the day, it's not about world order. It's about, can we all live understanding that we live better if we adhere to a certain set of values. And that is for personal freedoms and respecting each other's ability to express their opinions and to live their lives as they see fit if they're not hurting other people. To make sure that people get a fair shot at prosperity. And so that it's not just the wealthy, but all parts of the economy get a fair wage. And that we all recognize that we're living at a time of a climate crisis that needs to be addressed not by rich countries, but by everyone. And that we need to invest across the board in order to make sure that we don't face increased floods and fires and heat waves and a shortage of water. So these are the things that we can all come together. And it's not about who rules the world. There's no world order. If every country, if every society, in their own form of government, everybody's different. We're not imposing anything on anyone. But if you live and you allow everyone else to live a life with those basic freedoms and respecting everybody's differences and respecting the fact that we all need to come together on global crises and shape our societies at home the way we want. So some things we need to do together and some things we need to do individually in our countries. But we need to do them respecting everybody's values and respecting the fact that if you try to impose through threat and violence, it needs to be rejected as loudly as possible. Whether it's what Russia's doing in Ukraine or whether Iran is treating its own people on the streets just because women want to express their own opinions about how they live their lives and murdering people on the streets or executing them. These are the things that we all have to come together and say, that cannot happen in the 21st century. That's where we have to come together. To fight climate, that's together. But what we do in our own countries, as long as we respect those values, I think that's the world order that we should all want.
سيد آموس، شكرا جزيلا لك.
My pleasure. Thank you.
بهذا نأتي إلى نهاية هذه المقابلة الخاصة. مشاهدي سكاي نيوز عربية، أشكر لكم طيب المتابعة وألقاكم بأمان الله. إلى اللقاء.